Hello Booktube. This will be my first video with my new Handycam. This looks like a hostage video. Basically, I got a new mattress for the bed, and the old mattress we couldn't figure out how to dispose yet. So where to put it. It's got stains and holes in it and all of that. So it's just leaning against the wall, and I basically just threw a blue blanket over the back. So this looks like a hostage video. I'm experimenting. So with my new Handycam I can do a whole bunch of cut and paste jobs. Hopefully. Excuse me. So today I will be doing my review of The Thousand Autumns of Jacob de Zoet by David Mitchell. My edition is actually a large print edition, so the text was very big. I really enjoyed the reading experience. Made it a very easy, smooth read, as opposed to some of my paperbacks that I read that are very tiny text. Anyway, tangent over. So it's I want to talk about the setting and the plot in two separate sections because, well, how do I put this? It's very difficult. If I put the setting and the plot together, I might run the risk of forgetting something in this review. So the setting is, the story takes place in 1799 to 1800 Japan, with a early 19th century epilogue chapters. The book is divided into 5 parts, but really it's just 3 parts and an epilogue with 2 chapters. So there's like 1 chapter each for each of the last 2 parts. So basically, the structure of the book was really weird near the end, but it's basically 3 parts with an epilogue. And so the story takes place from 1799 to 1800 in Nagasaki, Japan, predominantly, with some flashbacks in Europe, some flashbacks as well, and in and parts of Indonesia as well. Anyway. So 1799 to 1800s, Nagasaki, Japan. Now the context of the story is, there's a place called, so some historical context, it's very important. In the 17th century, yes, in the 17th century, Japan was closed off to the rest of the world. They prohibited the proselytization into Christianity of the Japanese population, so they closed off Japan to the rest of the world. It was a hermit kingdom, essentially, a hermit empire, as they called it. But they did allow one exception for interaction with the outside world, and that was this man-made island with a bridge in Nagasaki. This man-made island was called Dejima. And there they chose one group of foreigners to trade with. So they allowed the Dutch. They allowed the Dutch to set up their factory there, their warehouses, and where they store all their goods, and trade for goods in Japan, with the Japanese crossing the bridge into the Dejima and essentially doing business with the Dutch. Now, in the mid 19th century, the 1850s, I believe 1858, that was the end of the era of the shogun, and it was when Japan was forced to open up to the world. It also happened at the same time as the Opium Wars in China. And 1799 to 1800 is also the rise of Napoleon. So the story takes place in a very transitional period. And so the story when I read the book, it felt like it's just a flash, a zoom in to one specific story in the context of a much bigger period in history, from the beginning of the Dutch monopoly of trade in Japan through Dejima, which is a small island with a few buildings where the Dutch merchants, the Dutch traders, are essentially held prisoner, and they can only conduct business with the Japanese through interpreters. And there, from what I read, they're not allowed to know Japanese, but the Japanese are allowed to learn the foreign language. So so they can't have their own interpreters, which I'm not sure why. Anyway, so 1799 to 1800 was a very transitional period. The rise of Napoleon, the United States had just become independent, and so it's like, and then I hear foreign influences are slowly being introduced into Japan via this little small route through Dejima. So foreign ideas like medicine. So there's a doctor in this book. A Dutch doctor, so Western medicine is being introduced into Japan as well, and Western social ideals and so on. So the story is like 1 foot in the traditional past and 1 foot into the modern age. So yeah, it's 1 foot in modernity and 1 foot in the past, because the Japanese still have the shogun society. It was still the shogunate era, and there were still samurai roaming the country. And the Japanese defenses at the time were still medieval, and then with the introduction of cannons and gunpowder, well, not gunpowder, but they didn't realize that that's actually something at the end of the story, that they realized that Japan is vulnerable to foreign attack because of modernizing weapons of cannon, and they were still using medieval style fortresses in Japan at the time. So that's the setting. Let's get on to the story. Now, the story itself has 3 or 4 interlocking narratives. 3 or 4 stories happening all at once in this place. So it's like a little bit like Cloud Atlas, but they're all happening at the same time. So there's Jacob de Zoet, Jacob de Zoet, who's a Dutch clerk working for the person who runs the Dejima, who runs this factory, this colonial factory, and he's actually an honest clerk. He's trying to clean up all the corruption, all the skimming going on by the other Dutchmen and Japanese alike, who cheat, who try to fudge the numbers. So he's trying to set things right. And then he realizes, of course, that his boss, the guy who runs the Dejima, is essentially the biggest crook of them all. Meanwhile, there's a Japanese midwife called Orito, who's learning from the local Dutch doctor there, Dr. Marinus, medicine, essentially. And her profession is delivering babies. So she helps women in childbirth. And her family is in debt to... her family, turns out, was in debt. And then her stepfather, I believe, her family sell her off for her debts to a temple where there is... to a temple in Nagasaki, or just outside of Nagasaki, on a mountaintop, which is run by a very sinister cult who don't treat the women, who don't treat the nuns there very well. So she becomes one of these nuns. I won't get into further detail because then it'll be spoiler territory. And meanwhile, the third part 3. So part 1 is about Jacob de Zoet. Part 2 is this midwife Orito and her and another Japanese interpreter who tries to rescue her from the temple, from this sinister monastery. And the third one is when the stories are resolved. And I say 3 or 4 because there's one interpreter and there's one Japanese interpreter who tries to rescue Orito, and the magistrate, which is something like a local judge of Nagasaki. There are some chapters from his perspective as well. And so these 2 stories are resolved jointly in part 3. Yeah. This book is mostly historical fiction with a pinch of fantasy, because there is some supernatural element concerning this cult on the mountain, concerning this monastery and these monks. There is a supernatural element that I won't get into, that I hope you can read, I hope you will pick up this book and read about it. So it's mostly historical fiction with a pinch of fantasy. Now, these multiple storylines, multiple interlocking storylines, is similar to other books written by David Mitchell. And just like with his other books, it's in a shared universe. There's even a reference to Cloud Atlas here. The words Cloud Atlas shows up in this book. So yeah, David Mitchell, similar to Stephen King, has a shared universe with his books, and just like similar to many of his other books, it's multiple storylines that are connected. I believe in film they call it a hyperlink film. So it's a hyperlink story. But unlike Cloud Atlas, it's not different time periods, but it's all happening at the same time. Another thing I forgot to mention: Jacob de Zoet tries to propose marriage to Orito when he sees her on Dejima, learning medicine from Dr. Marinus. So anyway. Jacob de Zoet is when he refuses to sign some forged papers, some forged papers, some false documents. His boss abandons him and leaves him there. You're gonna stay there for the next around 17 years, 17 to 18 years. You will have to pay your way to get off this man-made island called Dejima. So there's a lot of plots happening, and then in the third part, where the story is resolved, there's the showdown with a British ship captain who wants to take over Dejima for the British and take out the Dutch. And it's also on New Year's Day 1800, and I just learned this through this book, that the VOC, this Dutch company, this Dutch East Indies company that ran Indonesia at the time, became bankrupt. So now they are working for a company that no longer exists. So the British come in and try to kick them out. I won't say what happens next because I want you to read this book. So, that's about it with the story. I liked the immersion into the atmospheric immersion into Japan of the past, similar to Musashi and similar to another fantasy series called Tales of the Otori by Lian Hearn. I actually like the Japan of the past, but this is intermixed with colonial era Dutchman as well. So reading about the Dutch and the Japanese at the same time was very interesting to me. I learned some history from this book, even though it's fictional. Yeah, I enjoyed that a lot. As for the characters, Orito is a very strong-headed, determined woman who doesn't fall for a mind control manipulation of the cult, and she is very talented in delivering babies safely. So I liked her character a lot. A strong, independent woman trying to make the best of a difficult situation. Talented and intelligent woman trying to make the best of a difficult situation, and she saves the lives of women through delivering their babies safely. That put a smile on my face. Jacob de Zoet is a pious, religious Dutch Reformed Christian. A Reformed Church of the Netherlands, I believe it was called. So it's a Protestant denomination. He's seemingly devout. Christianity, by the way, is forbidden in Japan at the time, so no open expressions of their religion allowed. So they're not allowed to bring Bibles onto the Dejima, for example. They're there strictly for business. But he is a pious, religious individual, so in his private time he prays. And he's actually there to earn money for his to get married to the woman he loves back in the Netherlands. But he falls in love with a Japanese woman, and which is actually not allowed. They're only allowed to have these very expensive prostitutes. This is a weird thing I learned. Dejima wives, they're called. And Orito's not one of them. So it's forbidden love. So Christianity was banned in Japan. So yeah, he's a seemingly pious, devout individual. But in the book it is revealed he occasionally has fun with prostitutes. So the book does not. The book he has some remorse. He has some guilt for this vice of his. But I just felt it was inconsistent for a so-called devout and pious individual. So yeah, Jacob de Zoet is a little bit of a hypocrite. It just makes his character more interesting and complex. So I would not change that. I just felt like I'm right to criticize him. All right, I would give this book. Right. So this is, like I said earlier, a flashpoint in the context of a much larger story, of a much larger history, from when Japan was closed off to the world and when it opened up to the world. And it's in the transitional period with the rise of Napoleon and everything like that. So it seems like there is room for sequels if David Mitchell wanted it. If David Mitchell chose to, he could make sequels, because the story seems to take place in the context of a much bigger picture. I rate this book an 8 out of 10. I subtract some points for there's one really annoying thing in this book, and that is he often has scenes with multiple characters all throwing in their voice at once, and sometimes some named characters are not really important. Who are you? Why are you talking in this really big meeting? And he doesn't really build a lot of personality initially with some of these encounters with various characters. Later, their histories are revealed in flashbacks. Some of the Dutch characters, their histories are revealed in flashbacks. But when you initially meet them, there's like sometimes scenes with multiple characters all talking at once in these meetings, and I'm saying, are you really important to the overall context of this story? Is that character important? Is that character important? I would say no. So he does this annoying thing of throwing several characters, some less significant than others, into one singular scene. So I kind of found that frustrating because I couldn't always follow who was who at any given moment. Yeah, so it loses points for that, and it also, and because this is a standalone book, a standalone story. Sorry, my camera died there, so now I have to charge my Handycam while I'm recording a third video. I give this book an 8 out of 10. I was saying, in the context, because it was just a singular point in the context of a much bigger sequence of historical events, there was room for sequels, but David Mitchell chose to make it a standalone book, which is a little bit of a disappointment. That's why it loses points there. Because there is room for sequels, there is room for prequels, it's a much, much bigger story. So yeah, for that annoying thing of having too many characters talking all at once, and the fact that it has no prequels or sequels, it's a small flashpoint in a much bigger story. It loses points, but otherwise a very well written book, and very interesting and educational, and some really colorful characters in it, even though sometimes it's too many. Highly recommend. 8 out of 10. Thank you for listening in. Goodbye.